Applied Linguistics Group uploaded this video. This group is for helping students of BS, MS, MPhil, and PhD in English Linguistics, Applied Linguistics TEFL, TESOL, TOEFL and IELTS students. Dr. Khalid Malik is the founder of Applied Linguistics Group's youtube.com/@1966 Pakistani. Dr. Khalid Malik has a PhD in Applied Linguistics TESOL. He published more than 25 research papers. He taught a lot of foreign universities and admitted to a postdoctoral study project in Canada. Help others easily find Applied Linguistics Group by copying or downloading a QR code to join. English language origin and history. Historical background. Among highlights in the history of the English language, the following stand out most clearly: the settlement in Britain of Jutes, Saxons, and Angles in the 5th and 6th centuries, the arrival of Saint Augustine in 597 and the subsequent conversion of England to Latin Christianity, the Viking invasions of the 9th century, the Norman conquest of 1066, the Statute of Pleading in 1362, this required that court proceedings be conducted in English, the setting up of William Caxton's printing press at Westminster in 1476, the full flowering of the Renaissance in the 16th century, the publishing of the King James Bible in 1611, the completion of Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of 1755, and the expansion to North America and South Africa in the 17th century and to India, Australia, and New Zealand in the 18th. Old English. The Jutes, Angles, and Saxons lived in Jutland, Schleswig, and Holstein, respectively, before settling in Britain. According to the Venerable Bede, the first historian of the English people, the first Jutes, Hengist and Horsa, landed at Ebbsfleet in the Isle of Thanet in 449, and the Jutes later settled in Kent, southern Hampshire, and the Isle of Wight. The Saxons occupied the rest of England south of the Thames, as well as modern Middlesex and Essex. The Angles eventually took the remainder of England as far north as the Firth of Forth, including the future Edinburgh and the Scottish Lowlands. In both Latin and Common Germanic the Angles name was Angli, later mutated in Old English to Ingle, nominative, and Ingla, genitive. Engleland designated the home of all three tribes collectively, and both King Alfred, known as Alfred the Great, and Abbot Alfric, author and grammarian, subsequently referred to their speech as Englisk. Nevertheless, all the evidence indicates that Jutes, Angles, and Saxons retained their distinctive dialects. Old English dialects, distribution. The River Humber was an important boundary, and the Anglian-speaking region developed two speech groups, to the north of the river, Northumbrian, and, to the south, Southumbrian, usually referred to as Mercian. There were thus four dialects: Northumbrian, Mercian, West Saxon, and Kentish. In the 8th century, the Northumbrian speech group led in literature and culture, but that leadership was destroyed by the Viking invaders, who sacked Lindisfarne, an island near the Northumbrian mainland, in 793. They landed in strength in 865. The first raiders were Danes, but they were later joined by Norwegians from Ireland and the Western Isles who settled in modern Cumberland, Westmoreland, Northwest Yorkshire, Lancashire, North Cheshire, and the Isle of Man. In the 9th century, as a result of the Norwegian invasions, cultural leadership passed from Northumbria to Wessex. During King Alfred's reign, in the last 3 decades of the 9th century, Winchester became the chief centre of learning. There the Parker Chronicle, a manuscript of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, was written. There the Latin works of the priest and historian Paulus Orosius, Saint Augustine, Saint Gregory, and the Venerable Bede were translated, and there the native poetry of Northumbria and Mercia was transcribed into the West Saxon dialect. This resulted in West Saxons becoming standard Old English. About a century later, when Alfric wrote his lucid and mature prose at Winchester, Cerne Abbas, and Aynsham, the hegemony of Wessex was strengthened. In Standard Old English, Adjectives, nouns, pronouns, and verbs were fully inflected. Nouns were inflected for 4 cases: nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, in singular and plural. 5 nouns of first kinship, father, mdor, thor, swioster, and daughter, father, mother, brother, sister, and daughter respectively, had their own set of inflections. There were 25 nouns such as mon, men, man, men, with mutated, or umlauted, stems. Adjectives had strong and weak declensions, the strong showing a mixture of noun and pronoun endings and the weak following the pattern of weak nouns. Personal, possessive, demonstrative, interrogative, indefinite, and relative pronouns had full inflections. The pronouns of the first and second persons still had distinctive dual forms. I, wit, we too, w, we, th, thou, it, you too, you. There were 2 demonstratives, s, so, theat, meaning that and thus, those, this, meaning this but no articles, the definite article being expressed by use of the demonstrative for that or not expressed at all. Thus, the good man was escdemon or plain gdemon. The function of the indefinite article was performed by the numeral a with macron n1 in a with macron n1 a man by the adjective pronoun some in some mon a, certain, man or not expressed, as in th gdemon you are a good man. Verbs had 2 tenses only, present, future and past, 3 moods, indicative, subjunctive, and imperative, 2 numbers, singular and plural, and 3 persons, first, second, and third. There were 2 classes of verb stems. A verb stem is that part of a verb to which inflectional changes indicating tense, mood, number, etc., are added. One type of verb stem, called vocalic because an internal vowel shows variations, is exemplified by the verb for sing, singen, singth, sang, sungen, sungen. The word for deem is an example of the other, called consonantal, dman, dmth, dmd, dmdn, jidmd. Such verbs are called strong and weak, respectively. All new verbs, whether derived from existing verbs or from nouns, belong to the consonantal type. Some verbs of great frequency, antecedents of the modern words be, shall, will, do, go, can, may, and so on, had their own peculiar patterns of inflections. Grammatical gender persisted throughout the Old English period. Just as Germans now say der Fuss, die Hand, and das Auge, masculine, feminine, and neuter terms for the foot, the hand, and the eye, so, for these same structures, Alfric said sft, so Hond, and theatei, also masculine, feminine, and neuter. The 3 words for woman, fman, quen, and wf, were masculine, feminine, and neuter, respectively. Horse, sap, sheep, and maiden were all neuter. Earth was feminine, but land was neuter. Sun was feminine, but moon was masculine. This simplification of grammatical gender resulted from the fact that the gender of Old English substantives was not always indicated by the ending but rather by the terminations of the adjectives and demonstrative pronouns used with the substantives. When these endings were lost, all outward marks of gender disappeared with them. Thus, the weakening of inflections and loss of gender occurred together. In the North, where inflections weakened earlier, the marks of gender likewise disappeared first. They survived in the South as late as the 14th century. Because of the greater use of inflections in Old English, word order was freer than today. The sequence of subject, verb, and complement was normal, but when there were outer and inner complements the second was put in the dative case after to, as Biscop Godard T. Sininge the bishop consecrated Edred King. After an introductory adverb or adverbial phrase the verb generally took second place as in modern German, en by die with macron en thing now I ask, literally, ask I, one thing, thl Kangaria G set Alfred Sinning Lundenburg in that same year Alfred the King occupied London. Impersonal verbs had no subject expressed.
Infinitives constructed with auxiliary verbs were placed at the ends of clauses or sentences. Hen Dorsten forth be there a Siglan they dared not sail beyond that river. Siglan is the infinitive. I wold tha with Macron s like land bc Wendon I wanted to translate this little book. Wendon is the infinitive. The verb usually came last in a dependent clause, e.g. written while in hwa with Macron tha with Macron sbc written while. Jared hhe be there bison. If anyone wants to copy this book, let him correct his copy by the original. Prepositions, or postpositions, frequently followed their objects. Negation was often repeated for emphasis. Middle English. Middle English dialects. One result of the Norman conquest of 1066 was to place all four Old English dialects more or less on a level. West Saxon lost its supremacy, and the centre of culture and learning gradually shifted from Winchester to London. The Old Northumbrian dialect became divided into Scottish and Northern, although little is known of either of these divisions before the end of the 13th century. The Old Mercian dialect was split into East and West Midland. West Saxon became slightly diminished in area and was more appropriately named the Southwestern dialect. The Kentish dialect was considerably extended and was called Southeastern accordingly. All five Middle English dialects, Northern, West Midland, East Midland, Southwestern, and Southeastern, went their own ways and developed their own characteristics. The so-called Catherine group of writings, c. 1180-1210, associated with Hereford, a town not far from the Welsh border, adhered most closely to native traditions, and there is something to be said for regarding this West Midland dialect, least disturbed by French and Scandinavian intrusions, as a kind of standard English in the High Middle Ages. Another outcome of the Norman conquest was to change the writing of English from the clear and easily readable insular hand of Irish origin to the delicate Carolingian script then in use on the continent. With the change in appearance came a change in spelling. Norman scribes wrote Old English y as u, as ui, as ou, I when final. Thus, Mysel, March, appeared as muchel, fr, fire, as fui, hs, house, as whose, and h, how, as how. For the sake of clarity, i.e., legibility, u was often written o before and after m, n, u, v, and w, and I was sometimes written y before and after m and n. So su new, son, appeared as son and him, as hym. Old English CW was changed to question, HW to WH, question, or coup, to CH or TCH, S to SH, to GG, and height to GHT. So Old English CWN appeared as queen, quoy as what, or cat, D as ditch, sip as ship, sec as sec, and mit as might.
For the first century after the conquest, most loanwords came from Normandy and Picardy, but with the extension south to the Pyrenees of the Angevin Empire of Henry II, reigned 1154-89, other dialects, especially Central French, or Francian, contributed to the speech of the aristocracy. As a result, modern English acquired the forms canal, catch, leal, real, reward, wage, warden, and warrant from Norman French side by side with the corresponding forms channel, chase, loyal, royal, regard, gage, guardian, and guarantee, from Francian. King John lost Normandy in 1204. With the increasing power of the Capetian kings of Paris, Francian gradually predominated. Meanwhile, Latin stood intact as the language of learning. For 3 centuries, therefore, the literature of England was trilingual. Ancren Ryle, for instance, a guide or rule, Ryle, of rare quality for recluses or anchorites, Ancren, was disseminated in all 3 languages. The sounds of the native speech changed slowly. Even in late Old English short vowels had been lengthened before ld, rod, mb, and nd, and long vowels had been shortened before all other consonant groups and before double consonants. In early Middle English short vowels of whatever origin were lengthened in the open stressed syllables of dissyllabic words. An open syllable is one ending in a vowel. Both syllables in Old English nama name meet meet, food knows you knows wick you week and Durudor were short, and the first syllables, being stressed, were lengthened to na with macron me, mte, nse, wke, and dra in the 13th and 14th centuries. A similar change occurred in 4th century Latin, in 13th century German, and at different times in other languages. The popular notion has arisen that final mute E in English makes a preceding vowel long. In fact, it is the lengthening of the vowel that has caused E to be lost in pronunciation. On the other hand, Old English long vowels were shortened in the first syllables of trisyllabic words, even when those syllables were open. For example, Ligdate Holy Day Errand message, Errand Kirsten Christianity Anston Southern became Liddy, Northern Liddy, Ruddy, Kirstendom, Anston. This principle still operates in current English. Compare, for example, trisyllabic derivatives such as the words chastity, criminal, fabulous, gradual, gravity, linear, national, ominous, sanity, and tabulate with the simple nouns and adjectives chaste, crime, fable, grade, grave, line, nation, omen, sane, and table. There were significant variations in verb inflections in the northern, midland, and southern dialects, as shown in the table comparing the word sing across these dialects. The northern infinitive was already one syllable, sing rather than the Old English singen, whereas the past participle en inflection of Old English was strictly kept. These apparently contradictory features can be attributed entirely to Scandinavian, in which the final n of the infinitive was lost early in Singer, and the final n of the past participle was doubled in Sungin. The northern unmutated present participle in and was also of Scandinavian origin. Old English mutated nd, German end, in the present participle had already become nd in late West Saxon, and it was this southern nd that blended with the ing suffix, German ung, of nouns of action that had already become near gerunds in such compound nouns as swearing oath swearing and writing feather, pen. This blending of present participle and gerund was further helped by the fact that Anglo-Norman and French and was itself a coalescence of Latin present participles in antum, entum, and Latin gerunds in andum, endum. The northern second person singular singis was inherited unchanged from common Germanic. The final T sound in Midlandist and Southern St was excrescent, added without any etymological reason, comparable with the final T in modern amidst and amongst from older amidst and amongst. The northern third-person singular singis had a quite different origin. Like the singis of the plural, it resulted almost casually from an inadvertent retraction of the tongue in enunciation from an interdental th sound to postdental s. In modern English the form singeth survives as a poetic archaism. Shakespeare used both f and s endings, it, mercy, blesseth him that gives and him that takes the Merchant of Venice. The Midland present plural inflection en was taken from the subjunctive. The past participle prefix y developed from the Old English perfective prefix ge. Variations in verb inflections. Northern, Midland, Southern. Infinitive. Sing. Singe, n. Singen. Present participle. Singend. Singendi. Singendi. Present singular. First person. Singe. 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 Second person. Singis. Singes, t. Singst. Third person. Singis. Singethes. Singeth. Present plural. Singis. Singen. Singeth. Past participle. Sungen. Y. Sunge, n. Junge. Chaucer, who was born and died in London, spoke a dialect that was basically East Midland. Compared with his contemporaries, he was remarkably modern in his use of language. He was in his early 20s when the Statute of Pleading, 1362, was passed, by the terms of which all court proceedings were henceforth to be conducted in English, though enrolled in Latin. Chaucer himself used 4 languages. He read Latin, classical and medieval, and spoke French and Italian on his travels. For his own literary work he deliberately chose English. Transition from Middle English to Early Modern English. The death of Chaucer at the close of the century, 1400, marked the beginning of the period of transition from Middle English to the Early Modern English stage. The Early Modern English period is regarded by many scholars as beginning about 1500 and terminating with the return of the monarchy, celebrated in John Dryden's poem Astraea Redux, in 1660. The 3 outstanding developments of the 15th century were the rise of London English, the invention of printing, and the spread of the new learning associated with the Renaissance. Although the population of London in 1400 was only about 40,000, it was by far the largest city in England. York came second, followed by Bristol, Coventry, Plymouth, and Norwich. The Midlands and East Anglia, the most densely peopled parts of England, supplied London with streams of young immigrants. The speech of the capital was mixed, and it was changing. The 7 long vowels of Chaucer's speech had already begun to shift. Incipient diphthongization of high front /I/. The E sound in meet, and high back /U/. As in fool, led to instability in the other 5 long vowels. Symbols within slash marks are taken from the International Phonetic Alphabet. This remarkable event, known as the Great Vowel Shift, changed the whole vowel system of London English. As /I/ and /U/ became diphthongized to /RE/, as in bide, and /or/, as in house, respectively, so the next highest vowels, /E/. This sound can be heard in the first part of the diphthong in name, and /O/. A sound that can be heard in the first part of the diphthong in home, moved up to take their places, and so on. The table shows the vowel shift in London English. Every one of the sounds appearing in this table can still be heard somewhere in living English accents. Vowel shifts in London English. Asterisk expressed in the International Phonetic Alphabet. Asterisk 2 syllables. Chaucer's. Spelling. Chaucer's. Pronunciation asterisk. Shakespeare's. Pronunciation asterisk. Present. Pronunciation asterisk. Present. Spelling. Lyf. Lief. Lif. Laif. Life. Deed. D. Did. Did. Deed. Deal. DL. DL. DIL. Deal. Name. NM asterisk asterisk. NM. Neem. Name. Whom. HM. Hoem. Whom. Home. Mon. Moen asterisk asterisk. Mun. Mun. Moon. Whose. 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 House. House. William Caxton's Cicero de Senectute. When William Caxton started printing at Westminster in the late summer of 1476, he was painfully aware of the uncertain state of the English language. In his prologues and epilogues to his translations, he made some revealing observations on the problems that he had encountered as translator and editor. At this time, sentence structures were being gradually modified, but many remained untidy. For the first time, non-professional scribes, including women, were writing at length. The revival of classical learning was one aspect of that Renaissance, or spiritual rebirth, that arose in Italy and spread to France and England. It evoked a new interest in Greek on the part of learned men such as William Grocyn and Thomas Linacre, Sir Thomas More, and Desiderius Erasmus. John Colet, Dean of St. Paul's in the first quarter of the 16th century, startled his congregation by expounding the Pauline epistles of the Christian New Testament as living letters. The deans who had preceded him had known no Greek, because they had found in Latin all that they required. Only a few medieval churchmen, such as Robert Grosseteste, Bishop of Lincoln, and the Franciscan Roger Bacon, could read Greek with ease. The names of the 7 liberal arts of the medieval curricula, the trivium and the quadrivium, it is true, were all Greek: grammar, logic, and rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, but they had come into English by way of French. Renaissance scholars adopted a liberal attitude to language. They borrowed Latin words through French, or Latin words direct, Greek words through Latin, or Greek words direct. Latin was no longer limited to Church Latin, it embraced all classical Latin. For a time the whole Latin lexicon became potentially English. Some words, such as consolation and infidel, could have come from either French or Latin. Others, such as the terms abacus, arbitrator, explicit, finis, gratis, imprimis, item, memento, memorandum, neuter, simile, and videlicet, were taken straight from Latin. Words that had already entered the language through French were now borrowed again, so that doublets arose: benison and benediction, blame and blaspheme, chance and cadence, count and compute, dainty and dignity, frail and fragile, poor and pauper, purvey and provide, ray and radius, sever and separate, straight and strict, sure and secure. The Latin equivalents for kingly and lawful have even given rise to triplets, in the forms real, royal, and regal and leal, loyal, and legal. They were imported first from Anglo-Norman, then from Old French, and last from Latin direct. Isaac Newton, Optics. After the dawn of the 16th century, English prose moved swiftly toward modernity. In 1525 Lord Berners completed his translation of Jean Froissart's Chronicle, and William Tyndale translated the New Testament. 1/3 of the King James Bible, 1611, it has been computed, is worded exactly as Tyndale left it, and between 1525 and 1611 lay the Tudor Golden Age, with its culmination in William Shakespeare. Too many writers, to be sure, used inkhorn terms newly coined ephemeral words, and too many vacillated between Latin and English. Sir Thomas More actually wrote his Utopia in Latin. It was translated into French during his lifetime but not into English until 1551, some years after his death. Francis Bacon published De Dignitatis Augmentis Scientiarum, on the dignity and advancement of learning, an expansion of his earlier Advancement of Learning, in Latin in 1623. William Harvey announced his epoch-making discovery of the circulation of the blood in his Latin De Motu Cordis et Sanguinis in Animalibus, 1628, on the motion of the heart and blood in animals. John Milton composed polemical treatises in the language of Cicero. As Oliver Cromwell's secretary, he corresponded in Latin with foreign states. His younger contemporary Sir Isaac Newton lived long enough to bridge the gap. He wrote his Principia, 1687, in Latin but his Optics, 1704, in English. Restoration period. With the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, writers again looked to France. John Dryden admired the Académie Française and greatly deplored that the English had not so much as a tolerable dictionary, or a grammar, so that our language is in a manner barbarous as compared with elegant French. After the passionate controversies of the civil wars, this was an age of cool scientific nationalism. In 1662 the Royal Society of London for the Promotion of Natural Knowledge received its charter. Its first members, much concerned with language, appointed a committee of 22 to improve the English tongue particularly for philosophic purposes. It included Dryden, the diarist John Evelyn, Bishop Thomas Sprat, and the poet Edmund Waller. Sprat pleaded for a close, naked, natural way of speaking, positive expressions, clear senses, a native easiness, bringing all things as near the mathematical plainness as possible. The committee, however, achieved no tangible result, and failed in its attempt to found an authoritative arbiter over the English tongue. A second attempt was made in 1712, when Jonathan Swift addressed an open letter to Robert Harley, Earl of Oxford, then Lord Treasurer, making a proposal for correcting, improving, and ascertaining, fixing, the English tongue. This letter received some popular support, but its aims were frustrated by a turn in political fortunes. Queen Anne died in 1714. Oxford and his fellow Tories, including Swift, lost power. No organized attempt to found a language academy on French lines has ever been made since. With Dryden and Swift, the English language reached its full maturity. Their failure to found an academy was partly counterbalanced by Samuel Johnson in his dictionary, published in 1755, and by Robert Lowth in his grammar, published in 1761. Age of Johnson. Samuel Johnson's definition of oaths. In the making of his Dictionary of the English Language, Samuel Johnson took the best conversation of contemporary London and the normal usage of reputable writers after Sir Philip Sidney, 1554-86, as his criteria. He exemplified the meanings of words by illustrative quotations. Johnson admitted that he had flattered himself for a while with the prospect of fixing our language, but that thereby he had indulged expectation which neither reason nor experience could justify. The two-folio work of 1755 was followed in 1756 by a shortened, one-volume version that was widely used for centuries afterward. Revised and enlarged editions of the unabbreviated version were made by Archdeacon Henry John Todd in 1818 and by Robert Gordon Latham in 1866. It was unfortunate that Joseph Priestley, Robert Lowth, James Buchanan, and other 18th-century grammarians, Priestley was perhaps better known as a scientist and theologian, took a narrower view than Johnson on linguistic growth and development. They spent too much time condemning such current improprieties as "I had rather not, you better go between you and I, it is me who is this for." Between four walls, a third alternative, the largest of the two, more perfect and quite unique. Without explanatory comment they banned "you" was outright, although it was in widespread use among educated people. On that ground it was later defended by Noah Webster. "You" was had, in fact, taken the place of both "thou wast" and "thou wert" as a useful singular equivalent of the accepted plural "you were." As the century wore on, grammarians became more numerous and aggressive. They set themselves up as arbiters of correct usage. They compiled manuals that were not only descriptive, stating what people do say, and prescriptive, stating what they should say, but also prescriptive, stating what they should not say. They regarded Latin as a language superior to English and claimed that Latin embodied universally valid canons of logic. This view was well maintained by Lindley Murray, a native of Pennsylvania who settled in England in the very year 1784 of Johnson's death. Murray's English grammar appeared in 1795, became immensely popular, and went into numerous editions. It was followed by an English Reader, 1799, and an English Spelling Book, 1804, long favorite textbooks in both Old and New England. 19th and 20th centuries. In 1857 Richard Cheynevic Trench, Dean of St. Paul's, lectured to the Philological Society on the theme, "On some deficiencies in our English dictionaries." His proposals for a new dictionary were implemented in 1859, when Samuel Taylor Coleridge's grandnephew, Herbert Coleridge, set to work as first editor. He was succeeded by a lawyer named Frederick James Fernie Val, who in 1864 founded the Early English Text Society with a view to making all the earlier literature available to historical lexicographers in competent editions. Fernie Val was subsequently succeeded as editor by James A. H. Murray, who published the first fascicle of a new English dictionary on historical principles in 1884. Later Murray was joined successively by three editors, Henry Bradley, William Alexander Craigie, and Charles Talbot Onions. Aside from its supplements, the completed dictionary itself filled 12 volumes, had over 15,000 pages, contained 414,825 words, and was illustrated by 1,827,306 citations. It sought to represent English in the British Commonwealth and the United States, a fact symbolized by the presentation of first copies in the spring of 1928 to King George V and President Calvin Coolidge, and to record the histories and meanings of all words known to have been in use since 1150. From 1150 to 1500 all 5 Middle English dialects, as has been seen, were of equal status. They were therefore all included. After 1500, however, dialectal expressions were not admitted, nor were scientific and technical terms considered not to be in general use. Otherwise, the written vocabulary is well represented. A revised edition of this dictionary, known as the Oxford English Dictionary, was published in 1933, and a second edition was published in 1989. Online publication of the dictionary's corpus enabled ongoing revision and expansion. Applied Linguistics Group uploaded this video for helping students of BS, MS, MPhil, and PhD in English Linguistics, Applied Linguistics TEFL, TESOL, TOEFL and IELTS students. Dr. Khalid Malik is the founder of Applied Linguistics Group youtube.com/@1966 Pakistani. Dr. Khalid Malik has a PhD in Applied Linguistics TESOL. He published more than 25 research papers. He taught a lot of foreign universities and admitted to a postdoctoral study project in Canada. Help others easily find Applied Linguistics Group by copying or downloading a QR code to join.